Okay, so our first speaker this evening, Sam, part 2 of a super fun history of climate change, the prequel. Sam.
Thanks. Hello. Let me just start my timer to keep myself honest here. As I'm speaking first, let me just say a quick thank you to our hosts and organisers. Can we give a big round of applause to Becky and Mark from Old Space, to James from Avalon. Woo! Love you guys.
One of them does something.
Sorry?
One of them does something.
Yeah, one of them. Yeah, and obviously a big thank you to everyone who spoke last night. You guys set a very high bar that I am not at all nervous about. So, cool. Let's get started with a very fun history of climate change. Let's begin with a description from a passport from 1865. Because back in 1865, passports didn't have photos. They had a description of the person written inside them. And this description describes a lady called Eunice Newton Foote, who, according to her passport, was tall, had dark brown hair, and, I quote verbatim, a rather large mouth. If you ask me, it's a little bit judgy, but luckily she is not remembered for her rather large mouth. She is remembered for her contribution to the history of climate science, which is something that you all learn in high school, but you probably don't know where it comes from. So I'm going to describe the experiment that she did, and I'd like you to try and guess what she found out that's so fundamental and so important for our understanding of the climate. So she took these glass tubes that were about this long and about this thick. She filled them up with various different gases, and then she left them in the sun, and she measured the temperature changes that occurred in those glass tubes. What do you think she might have found out? Yes, brave sir.
Greenhouse effect?
The greenhouse effect, exactly. She discovered, well done, round of applause. We have our very own climate science hero right here. She discovered that if you put carbon dioxide in a glass jar, it will heat up quicker than air. And she speculated that an atmosphere with more carbon dioxide in it would get hotter than one with just air. So she discovered the greenhouse effect, effectively, in 1856 in a scientific paper that is 2 pages long. It is so short that if I had given it to my high school science teacher, he would have told me to take science more seriously. But it goes down in history as the first discovery of the greenhouse effect, which is super interesting for us, and we take it for granted. But back then, this was 1856, right? So it's a very different world. The Industrial Revolution has started, and it's kind of in full swing, but it's not the global industrial world that we live in today. It's still super different. No one's talking about climate change. No one is talking about humans causing climate change. So why was Eunice Newton rather large mouth Foote looking at these glass jars? To understand that, we need to meet the next hero of our story, who is also the hero of I Am Legend, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, I, Robot, and Independence Day. That's right, it's Will Smith, born Oxfordshire, 1769. And Will Smith, this Will Smith, he took advantage of the greatest opportunities of his age, which was the very early Industrial Revolution, where one of the best things you could do was to dig a really big hole in the ground. This was like the best time in human history for digging holes, because it was suddenly economically very important to get coal out of the ground, to dig canals, and that's exactly what this Will Smith was doing. He was paid to go down these mines and to survey the rocks that were found there. He was paid basically to make mines more stable and more profitable. The way that he went about classifying the rocks in the mines is actually super important for our understanding of the climate today. Because instead of looking at the rocks, he looked at what was in the rocks, which was fossils. And he made this amazing discovery that the same fossils consistently appear in the same layers of rock all throughout England. And he made this geological survey of the United Kingdom in 1815, which was super early, and it revealed that these fossils were very consistently in different layers. Now, why was he looking at fossils? Because we really had to understand this was a little bit before our current understanding, because we know that fossils are things that used to be alive, that died a long time ago, got turned into rock and everything. But that's not the way that it's always been. And the history of understanding fossils is actually super, super trippy and super weird and crazy. And I'm very happy that today we're going to get to go back not only to the Industrial Revolution, which is one of my favorite periods of history because it's when this crazy ancient world turned into a very recognizable modern world. We're going to get to go even further back than that into the crazy ancient world, which was really trippy AF time to be alive. Like, the ideas that they had about the world were really crazy. To give you just a quick idea, one of my favorite pieces of medieval thinking about the world, you can imagine back then in the medieval period, most scientists were monks. So imagine a very serious monk telling you, completely straight-faced, that elephants give birth in water so that their babies are not eaten by dragons. This is the world we are going back to now to understand fossils. In fact, let's go back even a little bit further, because when we go back to the prehistoric world, we don't have any recorded thought about what people really thought. No one wrote anything down. We only have the objects that they made, and they made a lot of objects with fossils. So from prehistoric times, we find things like knives with fossils embedded in the handles. We find things like fossils with holes drilled in them so that you can put them on a necklace and wear them as jewelry. We find fossils arranged around burial sites in a way that suggests some kind of ceremony. So clearly, we don't know what prehistoric people thought about fossils, but we can kind of assume that they thought they were weird or special or interesting in some way. By the time we get to the ancient world, so like ancient Greece, we get recorded thoughts. We know what people thought about fossils. And there was a very, very lively discussion about fossils, which I'm sure would happen today as well, right? They're super interesting. So why would it's really a mind-blowing mental shift that you have to make, right? Because we know the world is super old. We know that there have been different climate times, different geological times. We're all taught this in high school. But back then, in the ancient world, what they saw, they assumed it had always been like that, and it was always going to be exactly the same, right? So what they saw was what they get, except with fossils. Fossils kind of made them think, hang on, something here isn't quite right. These fossils, they look like the animals that we have now, but they're not quite the same. They're rocks, but they also look like living things. Like, what the hell is going on with these? And they had a whole bunch of theories. So some people thought that it was kind of like 1,000 monkeys with 1,000 keyboards will write a Shakespeare play. Like, if you have 1,000 rocks in 1,000 places, you'll get some that happen to look like living things. Some thought that fossils grew underground, kind of like a potato that looks like a face. Like, they didn't have potatoes, but I'm sure they would have thought of that. Aristotle thought that fossils were living things that died in special places, like during an earthquake, and with magical gases were transformed into stone. But to give you an idea of just how much of a debate this was, he changed his mind and later thought that when you look at seashells, I was going to say, when you look at seashells on the seashore, that's a bad idea. When you look at seashells, fossilized and living, they look basically the same. So he came up with the idea that maybe fossils were things that used to be alive and died relatively recently. So by the time we get into the Middle Ages, people have updated this idea to explain some of the more mysterious things about fossils. Because it's one thing to look at a fossil of a seashell on the beach. It's another thing when you find a fossil of a seashell on top of a mountain, which is actually quite often where you find them. People had to explain this and they worked religious ideas into their thinking about fossils. So they started thinking, oh, the biblical flood transported these fossils to the top of mountains. And that was the way they explained them. But by the end, or after the medieval times, by the time we get to the Renaissance, some of the greatest minds of the day were still occupied with the question of fossils. Leonardo da Vinci wrote in a private notebook that he wasn't happy with this biblical flood explanation of how fossils get to the top of mountains. He was like, well, if it was the flood, then we'd find a load of other sea things up there, like fish, which we don't, so I'm not really happy with this. And he'd actually been to the beach, and he'd seen that sometimes sand gets sucked down into a hole and compressed into something that is more like rock. And he came up with the idea that perhaps fossils are things that died on the bottom of the sea, got sucked down, compressed, and turned into rock. But then that would mean that the tops of the mountains used to be under the water, which back then was a crazy, crazy idea. It's a good thing that he wrote this in his private notebook. He was already in enough trouble for like cutting up loads of bodies and everything. Barrett, you would have loved him. Luckily, those two never got together. Otherwise, human history would be a very, very different thing. So yeah, Leonardo da Vinci kind of came up with a much more modern-sounding theory of fossils, and he connected them with the idea that the world used to be different. Like, this was a new thing, to think that mountains could have been underwater. This was not common public thought, right? By the time we get 100 years later to the end of the 1700s, which was when Will Smith was born, you have people making even more discoveries as they dig up even more parts of the earth, looking for the rocks and the minerals and stuff that we needed for the Industrial Revolution. They're finding stuff like crocodiles in the north of France and the south of England. And they're looking at these things and they're like, okay, it's one thing to say that maybe a flood transported oysters from the beach to the top of a mountain. It's another thing to say, like, why is there a crocodile in northern France? Like, this is a different climate that we're talking about now. And as we go through the Industrial Revolution and people dig bigger holes, they make bigger discoveries about what the world used to be like. And when we get to the time of Will Smith, they're digging these huge coal mines which expose massive amounts of coal, and they're finding these incredible things. They're finding entire fossils of trees that are still upright. They're finding entire like grasslands that have been fossilized directly into the rock. And it's the closest thing that you're ever going to get to a snapshot photo of a completely different climate existing in the north of France or the south of England. And it kind of blows their mind, and they have to think about how to explain that. And they're starting to understand that the world isn't always, the world wasn't always the way it is today. And that's why Eunice Newton-Foote was filling those glass jars with different gases. She was looking for a mechanism that explains how the world could have been so different in the past. So I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts about this story, because I think there's two big ironies in all of this. One of them is that these people were looking for ways to explain the past, but what they actually figured out was the mechanism that determines their future, which is our present, and will determine our future as well. And the second thing is that when they dug all these holes and they found all this evidence and they came up with these theories, they weren't doing that to further science or to understand the planet. They were doing that to make money and to further the Industrial Revolution. And it was just kind of, it wasn't even a side quest. It was an unintended consequence of all of this profiteering and all of the things that we disagree with, or a lot of people disagree with these days. And this is the thing that gives me a little bit of hope, is that through going through the processes of the Industrial Revolution, there were many, many unintended consequences, and one of them was a greater understanding of the effects of the Industrial Revolution, which we live through now, and also maybe what we can do about those effects. So I'll leave you with that. I am mandatorily required to accept questions.
Is it part of your job? I don't know you. So.
Yeah, I used to work for a startup in sustainability, so that was my connection with climate science and stuff. Yeah.
If you die, would you like to turn into a fossil?
If it's a choice between that and leaving me with Barrett, then yeah, definitely. Cool. Then I think we're done.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
It was amazing. You're a legend.